The house breathes gently in the morning, even before the first teacup clinks against its saucer, even before the rustle of newspaper or the sound of coals settling in the grate. It begins, almost imperceptibly, with light dot. It leaks through tall, mullioned windows. Not a brash, overbearing sunlight, but a pale, milk-glass sort of illumination, a light that asks permission before entering. It slides down damask wallpaper and catches in the folds of thick curtains that have not yet been drawn. The air is still but faintly golden. This is the morning room, a space meant for gentleness and light and the first quiet rituals of the day. It is not the drawing room. It is not the parlor where guests might later sip sherry or play at the piano, and it is certainly not the breakfast room where toast, bracts, and marmalade might be passed around with energetic conversation. No, the morning room is softer than all that. It was often the preserve of the lady of the house, though its doors were not always shut to others. In middle-class homes of the late Victorian era, it was a retreat, a space that knew how to be both elegant and ordinary. Let us step inside. The wallpaper here is often lighter than in the rest of the house. Creams, pale yellows, soft floral patterns. These rooms were deliberately placed to face the east to catch the rising sun. That same sun which now lies gently across the threadbare rug underfoot and picks out motes of dust that swirl lazily in the air. You may notice a faint smell of beeswax and old roses and the comforting scent of linen that has been wellowed. The room is not large, but it carries itself with grace. In one corner, a small writing desk, ink bottle half filled, a blotter used just yesterday, a letter opener with a mother-of pearl handle sits beside a stack of unsealed envelopes. The handwriting, looping faintly smudged, suggests correspondence with a sister or cousin. Letters written slowly, with care. Over warm tea, on the mantelpiece, a clock ticks softly. It is slightly out of time with the larger one in the hallway, but here no one minds. Time is less precise in the morning room. It stretches a little longer. No rush. There's always another minute to finish a paragraph or sit in silence. The fireplace is not large, but functional. A thin plume of smoke rises lazily from the coals. There's a brass fender to catch stray ash, and an iron poker propped neatly against it. The warmth here is subtle, just enough to take the edge off the morning chill. A teacup rests on the table by the window. Porcelain, pale blue, with a hairline crack near the rim. Beside it, a small saucer bearing the ghost of a jam spoon, and a folded newspaper, yesterday's, probably opened to a column on household advice. There is something comforting about these objects. They are not placed to impress. They are placed to be used. A tall-backed chair stands before the window. Its upholstery faded but well cared for. You can almost imagine the shape of someone still sitting there, back straight, shawl drawn tight. Around the shoulders, eyes wandering out to the garden below. If you peer through the glass, you might just catch a glimpse of a gardener moving between hedges, or the flicker of bird wings around the laurel bush, but the window has misted slightly. In the early cool, the world outside can wait. Let us take a moment to notice the furnishings. The morning room is not luxurious in the way of the drawing room, nor strictly practical like the scullery. It is a blend, a floral settee perhaps, an heirloom, a needlepoint footstool with a missing tassel, a writing box once given as a wedding gift. Everything here has a memory. Even the walls speak in muffled tones, their paper faded from years of morning sun. And then there are the plants. No Victorian room was considered properly dressed without at least a few carefully arranged ferns or potted palms. In the morning room they flourish. The light suits them. You'll find a small maidenhair fern perched on the window sill, its delicate fronds trembling at the slightest disturbance of air. Perhaps a larger aspidistra near the door, a plant so hardy it became a staple of lower light areas, but here it thrives in comfort. Sometimes, if you look closely, you'll see a tiny trail of dust on the table from where the maid dusted just an hour ago, not out of carelessness, but inevitability. Dust is a constant companion in houses like this. It settles even as you breathe, and so the morning begins. The routine of this room is not fixed, but it does follow a rhythm. The lady of the house might spend an hour here before others rise. Letters are read, then answered. Receipts from the grocer are reviewed. Perhaps she places a small note for the cook, more dill for Friday's fish, or opens the household. Book 2 balanced last week's expenses. Later, a daughter might join her, in silence at first, then in soft conversation, a passing mention of the weather or of a cousin's visit. Sometimes there's sewing to be done, buttonholes that need mending, a hem adjusted. And the light here, always this forgiving, steady light, is perfect for the task. But there were other moments too, quiet ones, when the room was empty, save for the ticking of that little clock, when dust settled in slow spirals, when the ferns sighed and a fire dimmed. The morning room waited patiently for the next teacup, the next letter, the next sliver of early sun. Even in homes of modest means, where only one servant was kept, or none, the morning room endured in some form. Sometimes it was simply a sunlit corner of the sitting room, adapted for the quieter hours of the day. Sometimes it was a passageway between the kitchen and parlor, repurposed with a small table and worn armchair. The Victorians understood the importance of space for slowness. It was not always named, but it was always known, and so the morning room came to represent something more than its furniture or its wallpaper. It became a threshold between the solitude of sleep and the busyness of the day, between private thought and public action. A room that existed briefly in a different kind of time. Even now, if you walk through an old house in early light, you may stumble into such a space. You'll know it not by its label, but by its feeling, a hush, a slowness, a kind of suspended breath. That's the morning room, still listening, still remembering how the day once began. So let us leave it now, just as we found it. The teacup sits empty, the newspaper folded once more. Outside, the gardener moves on, and the light, that lovely, slow light, has crept a little higher on the wall. The house, once again, begins to stir. It is early still, long before the family wakes. The lamps have not yet been lit in the main corridors, and upstairs the carpets remain untouched by footsteps. But deep in the lower quarters of the house, another world is already breathing into life. Here the shadows are heavier, and the silence more practical than peaceful. There is no music, no embroidery, no letters waiting to be written, only water, dot and stone, and the raw beginning of the day's labor. This is the scullery, a place of utility and industry, quiet but indispensable. It is neither romantic nor glamorous, and few who lived upstairs gave it much thought. But in this small, often cramped room, the life of the house began, and in many ways it ended too. The scullery was the workhorse of the Victorian household. It was where the fire was first struck in the morning, and where the last bucket of dirty water was emptied late at night. Here the simplest tasks, washing dishes, peeling vegetables, scrubbing pans, took on a quiet rhythm, repeated day after day, and though rarely praised or remembered, these routines sustained everything else. Let us step inside carefully. Mind the step. The flagstones underfoot are uneven, worn down by decades of feet that passed without ceremony. The air is cooler. Here it always is. Moisture clings to the walls, not damp in a harmful sense, but ever present. A kind of indoor weather. The smell of lye soap, onion peel, and cold metal lingers. Above the doorway, a line of drying cloths flutters faintly. In the draught from the open window, not for decoration, only necessity. The architecture of the scullery is brutally functional. It was often positioned at the rear of the house or in the basement, with minimal natural light and good drainage. There is usually a deep sink, hewn from stone or metal, with a brass tap. If the household was fortunate enough to have running water, otherwise buckets, many buckets. Some filled the night before and left near the hearth so they would not be frozen by morning. Against one wall stands a heavy table marked with knife cuts and burn rings. Here potatoes were scrubbed, carrots trimmed, and apples peeled. The table tells its own story in stains and scratches, more honest than polished whatever could be. Above the sink, a small shelf carries chipped enamel mugs, scouring pads made of wire, and thick bars of brown soap. A scrubbing brush, bristles bent from use, leans against a rusted iron pot, blackened from too many stews. In the corner, a galvanized washtub stands on a wooden rack, waiting for clothes to be soaked or hands to be plunged into its icy depths. And then, of course, there is the maid in homes grand enough to employ one. The scullery maid was often the youngest, the smallest, and the lowest ranked of the servants. Hers was a world of silence and repetition. She was up before dawn, even in winter, and worked long after the others had retired. Her name might be forgotten, but her labor was the heartbeat of this room. She lit the fire, she hauled the coal, she fetched the water. She scoured the pots with sand and soap and salt until her fingers were raw and red. She peeled vegetables for the cook, mended chipped china with glue, and cleaned up after every meal before anyone upstairs even noticed. Their plates were missing. There was little room for comfort here. The scullery had no armchair, no fireplace for warmth, no view to the garden. If the maid was lucky, there might be a small stool to rest on between chores, and perhaps a crust of bread wrapped in cloth for a hasty breakfast. But she did not complain, or if she did, no one heard. The sounds of the scullery were particular, not the clinking elegance of the drawing-room, nor the quiet shuffle of the parlor. No, this room had its own music. The splash of water poured from a bucket, the harsh scrape of a pan against stone, the rhythmic pat of wet clothes wrung out by hand, the hiss of steam from boiled linens, the rustle of ash swept from a stove. It is a room of actions, not of words, and yet there is a kind of intimacy in it, a closeness with the physical world that is missing from other parts of the house. Here every object has a job. Every movement is known. The broom leans just so against the wall. The bucket handle leaves a callus on the palm. The dish rag always wears out on the same corner. Sometimes there is a small window high up on the wall. From here you might see the feet of a milkman passing, or a sliver of sky turning from grey to pale blue. In the winter this light is precious. It moves like a sundial across the sink basin, signaling the hours better than any clock could. When the main cook bustles in with a list of tasks, the scullery maid listens carefully. There is no room for error. Onions must be diced, water drawn to boiling, flour sifted, potatoes peeled but not too thick, and if a guest arrives unannounced, the scullery must be swept twice, the trays polished, the silver checked. No glory lives in this room, but great care does dot, and over time the scullery becomes a world unto itself, a private stage where the ordinary is elevated through repetition, where labor becomes ritual, where a girl becomes a woman, and her hands remember what her mind can forget. As the day goes on, the scullery fills and empties in cycles. Dirty dishes from breakfast are cleared, cleaned, and stacked. Then come the leeks and roots for lunch. Then the basins of soiled linens for washing. Then the pans from dinner crusted with gravy and stubborn fat. Always something, always. A task to be done, and yet there are moments, tiny ones, where time seems to slow, when the room is still, save for the last drip from a tap, or when the setting sun slants across the stone floor and warms it briefly, or when a bird lands on the window-sill and stares in, unafraid. In those moments the scullery is no longer a room of burden, it is a vessel, a memory, a place where the house speaks softly, not in marble halls or gilt-framed mirrors, but in steam and soap and the comfort of a job well done. Let us linger a moment longer, notice the stack of bowls, drying in a crooked tower, the spoon worn thin at the edges, the half-peeled onion left forgotten in the rush to prepare supper, the apron hanging from a nail, still damped from the morning's washing. These are the marks of living, the evidence of care. And so, when the fire dies down and the last pot is scoured, the scullery closes itself off from the rest of the house again. It does not seek attention, it asks for nothing, but it remembers every plate that passed through its basin, every hand that scrubbed, every drop spilled. It holds these things quietly, not with pride, but with tenderness, because in the scullery care was not spoken, it was done. Tomorrow the fire will be lit again, the water will boil, the cycle will begin once more, and no one upstairs will notice. But we will. There are some doors in a Victorian house that don't seem to lead anywhere. They are quiet, modest, often half hidden behind long hallways or tucked beside a servant's staircase. Their knobs are plain. Their hinges creak faintly when opened, as if reluctant to be disturbed. And yet, behind these doors, entire worlds are folded and stored with a reverence that few would expect. This is the linen cupboard, one of the most overlooked yet lovingly tended corners of the Victorian home. It is not a room in the traditional sense, not one for lingering or talking, or sitting by the fire, but it holds a certain sanctity, a hush that seems to linger even when the door is open. This was a space not for decoration, but for preservation, for care, for remembering the feel of freshly washed cloth, the scent of lavender sachets, the rustle of fabric that has been pressed and folded by skilled, quiet hands. Let us open the door, slowly. Inside, the light dims. It may be lit only by a transom window high above, or a single flickering gas sconce on the wall. The smell hits you first, not must or dust, but something older, warmer, a layered scent of starch, cedar wood, and lavender, gently soaked into cotton over decades. The air is dry, still, as if the fabric itself has absorbed all the noise. The shelves stretch upward, some to the height of the ceiling. They are neatly stacked, their wood stained dark by time and polish. On each shelf rest the quiet children of domestic life: sheets, pillowcases, tablecloths, napkins, hand towels, antimacassars, and dust covers, all folded with geometric precision, like a library where every book is made of thread. Victorian households placed great importance on linen. More than just cloth, it signified order, prosperity, and respectability. Clean linen was the mark of a well-run home. Stained or threadbare cloth spoke of disorder, a silent shame in a culture obsessed with surface and structure. Each item had its place and often its own season. There were summer sheets, light and breathable, worn thin by July heat. Winter flannels, heavier, brushed with wool, stored on the higher shelves until the first frost. Tablecloths ranged from everyday muslins plain, functional to Sunday damasks, embroidered with initials and hemstitching. Napkins were sorted by size and occasion. Towels were stacked from softest to roughest. A smaller shelf, perhaps a drawer, might hold items meant for special moments: christening gowns made from fine lawn, laid between tissue and lace, handkerchiefs embroidered with dates or initials, mourning veils wrapped in black tissue, tucked away and seldom touched, but never thrown out. To run the linen cupboard was no small task. In larger homes, it fell to the housekeeper, a matronly figure with a ring of keys and a mind like an abacus. She knew always how many table linens remained unstained, how many pillowcases needed mending, which cloths were due for boiling, and which were to be saved for next week's garden luncheon. In smaller homes, it might fall to the mistress herself, a quiet ritual of folded discipline and care. She would retreat into this world for an hour in the morning, sleeves rolled, eyes narrowed, counting, inspecting, smoothing the cloth with firm hands. The act of folding was not mindless, it was meditative, a kind of slow domestic prayer. Each kriss was deliberate, each corner aligned. And when the linen was truly fresh, washed, dried, bleached in the sun, and pressed beneath a hot iron, it held a sense of triumph. The Victorian age loved cleanliness, but more than that, it revered the performance of cleanliness. What better performance than a dining table laid with freshly pressed linen, each napkin folded with care, each edge stitched by hand. In homes without dedicated cupboards, a tall wardrobe or armoire might suffice. But even then, the method was the same. Linens wrapped in tissue or cheesecloth, dried lavender bundled in muslin, placed between the stacks, mending kits tucked in a drawer below, bone buttons, waxed thread, patches of matching cloth saved. From past repairs, there is something deeply tactile about this space. You can feel it as you imagine it, your fingertips brushing against starched cotton, the weight of folded flannel, the slick edge of a polished brass shelf label. The cloth carries history in its fibers. It remembers some of these sheets have been folded and unfolded for decades. A set of napkins used only at Christmas, a coverlet pulled out only when Aunt Edith visited, a pair of pillowcases embroidered long ago by a daughter now grown and married. These are not just items, they are quiet witnesses, and the work was never done. Linen had to be washed, often in scalding water, scrubbed with soap flakes or soda crystals, bleached by sunlight, boiled in copper pots if stains proved stubborn, then rinsed once, twice, sometimes 3 times, before being wrung out, stretched, and hung to dry. Only once dried could it be ironed, then folded, then returned to this quiet haven. Each step was laborious, but each also carried its own rhythm, a silent cadence shared between generations of hands. And what of the sounds? They are faint here, the gentle brush of cloth against wood, the creak of a shelf as it's leaned upon, the whisper of fabric being unfolded like the turning of a page in a sacred book. Occasionally, the light pat of a footfall as someone checks the inventory or retrieves a cloth for polishing. In winter, you might hear the soft sigh of draught slipping through the cracks, stirring the folded edges just slightly. In summer, a faint wasp might buzz against the high glass pane, too distant to be feared, but mostly there is silence. This room was never meant to entertain or impress. It was designed to be felt, not seen. A secret system, a pulse beneath the skin of the house, ensuring that every guest arrived to a clean napkin. Every bed offered a crisp sheet, and every tear could be dried with something soft and white and cared for. It is difficult now, in our world of dryers and fast fashion, to understand just how central linen was to the Victorian domestic order. It was not disposable. It was durable, valuable, intimate, passed down, patched, repurposed. A shirt might become a dish rag, a pillowcase might be cut into handkerchiefs, a tea towel might be hemmed from an old curtain, and in between those changes, those gentle metamorphoses, the linen waited. Here, in quiet stacks, in this narrow cupboard between rooms, sometimes, even today, in an old house, you might come across such a cupboard, long since forgotten by its name, but still filled with linens folded by long-ago hands. You'll find faint yellowing on the edges, small mends where the fabric gave way, corners embroidered with faded initials in red thread, and when you press your face to the cloth, perhaps you'll smell it, the lavender, the starch, the hint of lye soap long since vanished from modern life. That scent, it lingers like memory, like care, like the ghost of hands that never asked to be remembered but folded everything just the same. Let us close the door now. Gently we leave behind the perfect stacks, the old iron resting on its stand, the sachets tucked between folds like offerings to some quiet household god, and we step back into the hall, into the moving light and sound of the waking house. But we carry something with us, a softness, a stillness, the knowledge that even in the smallest spaces great beauty was made, not in chandeliers or ball gowns, but in the quiet folding of linen, and the silent, steady love of a house well kept. Some rooms carry the memory of sound. Even when they are perfectly still, You can feel it in the hush. Not silence exactly, but a quietness that has depth, as though something long ago had been said or sung or played, and the air still remembers. The music room is such a space. It doesn't need an audience anymore. It doesn't even need music. It just remembers. Let us walk in slowly. The door creaks just slightly as it opens, as if announcing your arrival to an empty room. The light inside is soft and indirect. It filters in through tall windows, half veiled with lace curtains, casting pale rectangles. Across a faded carpet, there is no fireplace here, or if there is, it is a modest one. This room was meant to hold warmth of another kind. Your eye is drawn immediately to the large object near the far wall, a piano-forte, upright, mahogany, its surface gently worn by years of practice and polish. Its lid is closed now. Dust clings lightly to the keys, settling in the cracks like time collecting in silence. A few sheets of music sit askew on the stand, etudes, perhaps, or a sonatina marked with pencil annotations from some long-forgotten hand. On the piano's top rests a metronome, its pendulum still, as if caught mid-swing decades ago. It leans slightly to one side, out of time, but dignified. This was a room not of grandeur, but of cultivation. In middle and upper-class Victorian homes, the music room was as much a symbol of refinement as it was a space for actual use. To have a room dedicated to music was to say something about the home's values, not wealth, necessarily, but rhythm, order, poise, a certain way of moving through the world. But for those who lived inside the house, it was much more than a symbol. This was a space for practice, for patience, a place where small fingers learned scales under watchful eyes, where daughters sat with backs straight, lifting their wrists carefully, again and again, until the C major arpeggio rang clean. The air here smells faintly of wood polish and old vellum, perhaps of beeswax from the floorboards, or a whiff of must from the velvet piano stool, long compressed by practice sessions that stretched late into dusky afternoons. It is not an unpleasant scent, only a quiet one, a scent of memory, rather. Then use dot. There are other instruments here, to dot in the corner. A cello leans in its case, unplayed, its bow lies nearby, strings frayed. A music stand, rusted just slightly at the hinge, still holds a piece of sheet music, a waltz, slow and stately. Against the far wall, a shelf of hymnals, piano books, and a few crumbling copies of the musical Times, their spines faded, their pages dog-eared and annotated. If you were to sit down at the piano now and press a single key, middle C, let's say, you'd hear it ring out just a fraction flat. The felt dampers a little slow to return. But in that one note is the echo of hundreds, perhaps thousands, played in this room across the decades. Imagine, for a moment, a typical Tuesday afternoon in the 1880s. The parlour maid has just lit the lamps in the hallway. Outside, rain drums gently against the glass. Inside, a daughter, perhaps 12, perhaps 15, is seated at the keyboard. Her governess stands behind her, correcting posture, pointing gently at the ledger lines. The girl begins again, a halting version of Mendelssohn, perhaps, or one of Schumann's simpler pieces. The room is filled with imperfection, but also progress. It is a sanctuary for mistakes, and that is rare in a house so tightly wound with etiquette and rules. The music room, in this way, became a kind of emotional greenhouse, a place where feelings were allowed to breathe modestly, yes, but freely nonetheless. Joy, frustration, reverie, disappointment, all came through the keys or the strings, or the human voice echoing lightly off the plaster ceiling. Many of these rooms doubled as drawing rooms when space required it. The pianoforte was pushed back, the music sheets tucked away, the cello retired to a corner, and guests welcomed in. But even then the music lingered. A vase of roses on the sideboard would rest beside a conductor's baton, a tea tray laid neatly on top of last night's score. There are photographs, too, in frames set on the piano's edge, a girl in white, holding her violin, a boy grim-faced, seated beside a harmonium. Sometimes there is a portrait above the mantel, a composer, perhaps Chopin or Haydn, engraved in stiff 19th-century lines. Watching over the room with quiet expectation, in some homes the family hosted musical evenings, not concerts, precisely more like recitals for family and friends. The daughter might perform a nocturne. The son might sing a folk tune with slightly off-pitch enthusiasm. The governess might turn pages, while father, never musical, nodded approvingly from his armchair. The candlelight in those moments must have danced gently on the keys. Reflections wobbled in the glass panes, the warmth of voices and string. Resonances filled the otherwise formal air of the home, and for those few hours the house breathed a little softer. But the music room was also a place of solitude. On quieter days, when no one else intruded, someone might sit alone, not to perform, but simply to play. An old hymn, perhaps, or the same few bars repeated until the fingers found the pattern without thinking. In those moments the music room felt alive, not because of what was played, but because of what was allowed. Here even a single note could feel like company, and when tragedy visited, as it did in so many homes, with its quiet, veiled step, the music room became a different kind of space. The daughter's favorite piece was no longer played. The sheet music was not removed, but left sitting quietly in its place, not forgotten, simply waiting. Dust would gather slowly, the piano would lose its tuning. The cello's bridge might bow slightly under tension, but the room did not grieve noisily. It kept its silence in key dot. Let us look once more around. There is a music box near the windowsill, the kind that plays when its lid is opened. A small ballerina stands frozen mid-pirouette, skirt flared, waiting for the key to be turned. When it plays, the sound is tinny but tender, a melody remembered from a nursery or a distant holiday. A velvet-bound folder sits nearby, holding certificates from long-past examinations, first prize, 1884, intermediate piano. A handkerchief is tucked inside, embroidered with a name we no longer recognize, the past in miniature, folded neatly, and left here for safekeeping. Even in homes that no longer hold instruments, the shape of the music room often remains. It becomes a study, or a spare room, or a place for storage. But beneath the layers of paint and new furniture, the echoes persist. If you sit quietly long enough, you might hear it, not the music itself, but the feeling of music, the presence of sound once loved and now gone, a kind of emotional outline. like the pale square on a wall where a picture once hung, and that is what the music room offers us. Even now, not performance, not display, but memory, of time spent imperfectly and patiently in the pursuit of something beautiful, of fingers fumbling their way into fluency, of voices rising not to impress but to feel, of silence made holy by what once filled it. Let us leave the music room gently. The piano remains quiet. The metronome still hasn't swung. The window lets in a final stripe of late afternoon light, and in the corner the cello rests. Listening. There are rooms in a house that exist not for the people who live there, but for those who might arrive. They are rooms of anticipation, prepared not in response to need, but in the quiet hope of it. Spaces that remain undisturbed for weeks, even months at a time, holding their breath, waiting gently. The spare bedroom was such a room, sometimes called the guest chamber, in grander homes, or simply the back bedroom in more modest ones. This space bore little of the intimacy found in the master rooms, nor the everyday whereof a child's quarters. It was not meant to be lived in. It was meant to be ready, and that readiness, more than anything, defined it. Let us step inside. The door swings open with a mild resistance, not from disuse, but from the way air settles in rooms long closed. A fine line of dust hugs the baseboards. Undisturbed, the light here is different, not direct, but diffuse. It filters through heavy curtains, often drawn partway across the window to prevent the sun from bleaching the linens. The room has a quiet coolness, even in summer, as if it resists change by instinct. The bed is made. It always is. It stands alone, against the wall, or centered beneath a faded oil painting. A modest brass or iron frame, sturdy, not ornate. The coverlet is white or cream, tucked tightly at the corners. A crochet blanket might be folded neatly at the foot. Two pillows rest upright like silent sentries, their lace edges crisp, perhaps yellowing just slightly with age. This is not a bed that remembers bodies. It remembers folds. It remembers being made and remade. Sheets pulled tight, blankets smoothed flat. The final fluff of the pillow before stepping back and closing the door once again. Near the bed stands a nightstand, simple in shape and purpose. On it, a small oil lamp or candle holder, a dish for rings or coins, perhaps a book left open to page 12, a volume of poems or a devotional tract. If the family was forward-thinking, there might even be a jug and basin for washing, covered loosely with a towel to keep out dust. Sometimes, on rare occasions, a small note was left folded neatly. Welcome, nothing more. There is a sense of politeness to the room, almost as if it doesn't want to offend. Its colors are neutral, its objects unassuming. It neither intrudes nor invites too strongly. It simply offers itself quietly, but within that quiet is a deep, textured richness. Because the spare bedroom is also a room of stories, not shouted or inscribed, but hinted at, stored in layers like pressed flowers in a forgotten book. Stories of visits and returns, of grown sons coming home for the holidays, their boots left neatly by the door, of elderly aunts arriving with carpet bags and long sighs, of family friends who stayed longer than expected when a snowstorm rolled in. Each left an impression. Each passed through, and the room absorbed it like cloth absorbs scent. and sometimes the stories were less joyful. This was the room offered when someone was convalescing, recovering from surgery, perhaps, or mourning a loss too sharp to face. In their own space, it was the room where someone might lie still through a long fever, the cool air helping when medicine could not. A place of retreat, of pause, of letting go. It was the room where change was welcomed gently, without judgment. The decor is always modest, a single wardrobe, perhaps with a lavender sachet tied to its handle. A dressing table, its mirror slightly silvered at the edges. On the walls, watercolors or pencil sketches of landscapes long out of fashion, not chosen for beauty, but for their quiet, for their ability to take up space without commanding it. And then there are the drawers, mostly empty, but never entirely so. One might contain a pair of wool socks knitted decades ago and never worn. Another holds a yellowed nightdress or a comb with missing teeth. Sometimes, tucked beneath the shelf paper, a letter, folded once, then again not sealed. Its ink faded, its contents unreadable, but its presence still very much alive. The air here smells of starch and dried roses. Not the bright, blooming scent of a fresh bouquet, but the gentle crumble of petals pressed between pages. It is not a scent you notice immediately, but one that reveals itself over time, as your breath slows to match the rhythm of the room. There is a chair, of course. Every spare bedroom has one. Not a particularly comfortable one, just enough to drape a shawl or sit to lace your boots. Its upholstery may be sun-faded. A small cushion may rest against its back, embroidered with initials that no one can quite remember. Often it is never sat in, but it is always there in some homes. The spare bedroom became a repository for time, a place where photographs not deemed fit for the drawing room were kept, where old trunks sat beneath the bed, filled with children's clothes, now too small, where a hatbox held a wedding veil, its netting yellowed, its comb bent, but its presence too sacred to discard. In other homes it served practical roles. A sewing machine, occasionally dusted off, stood near the window. A knitting basket waited beside the armchair. In summer it might hold drying herbs laid on cloth, their scents mingling with the room's quiet perfume. In winter, spare quilts were folded here, ready to be fetched if the fire burned low, and always, always, the door remained gently ajar. Not closed, not open, just waiting. Let us pause and imagine one such moment. It is December, snow falls softly outside. A carriage arrives at the gate, its wheels muffled by frost. Inside the house, a hush falls. The spare bedroom has been readied, sheets fresh, fire laid, a bowl of warm water set beneath the bed, and then footsteps on the stairs. The quiet rustle of luggage, a soft exhale, a voice, low and tired, saying only, "Thank you." That's all it took. In that moment, the spare bedroom became something more than just a room. It became a haven, a gift, a gesture of welcome that asked for nothing in return. There's something achingly human about that, about preparing a space not for oneself, but for someone else, not knowing when they will arrive or how long they will stay, or whether they'll come at all, and yet still making the bed, dusting the mirror, leaving a small vase of dried flowers on the sill, just in case. In this way, the spare bedroom is a deeply hopeful room, not dramatic, not urgent, but filled with the quiet faith that we will continue to need each other, that someone will knock, that someone will come home. Even in houses long abandoned, the shape of the spare bedroom often remains. A bed frame, perhaps, missing its mattress, a dresser drawer ajar, a faded patch on the wall where a mirror once hung. The room may be empty, but it is not without presence, because rooms that waited never quite forget how to. Let us return now to the doorway. The air is still. The pillow remains undented. The blanket has not moved, but there is something deeply comforting in that stillness, in knowing that the room is ready, should it ever be needed, that someone, somewhere, was expected, and the house remembered. How to welcome them. Time lives everywhere, in a house, in the slow dimming of candles, in the shifting light across wallpaper, in the creak of floorboards that only moan at dusk. But in some houses, in some rare and curious households, time was given a room of its own. It was never grand, never ostentatious, and never officially labeled the clock room, not on blueprints, not in ledgers, not in polite conversation, but it existed. A place where time could be gathered, measured, and on occasion listened to. The room itself was small, not much larger than a closet or perhaps a narrow study tucked at the back of the house. It may have once served as a dressing room or a nursery alcove or a linen press, but slowly, as time does, it became something else. It began with just one clock, a mantelpiece model, inherited or gifted, its brass bezel dulled with age. Then another was added, a tall case grandfather clock, its chimes deep and warm, brought in from an estate sale or rescued from a crumbling outbuilding. Then came the others, carriage clocks, kitchen clocks, wind-up alarm clocks, anniversary clocks under domed glass, all placed neatly on high shelves or small tables, until the room began to hum. Let us enter now. Close the door softly behind you. There's a hush here, not the hush of silence, but of delicate movement. A room full of breath, held at different rhythms, each clock ticking at its own pace, none precisely aligned. A pocket of gentle dissonance. Some ticks are sharp, like pinpricks. Others are soft, like footsteps on thick carpet. Some clocks move, visibly pendulums swinging, wheels turning. Others hide their motion, offering only the faintest vibration against the surface where they rest. The room smells faintly of oil and metal. Not unpleasant, more like a watchmaker's bench or the inside of an old jewelry box. There's a warmth in the air, created not by fire but by presence, the quiet labor of springs and gears working through the hours. There is no chair here, no desk, no fireplace, only time. The walls are lined with shelves, each carefully arranged. No clock is broken, though some are slow. A few gain minutes daily, others lose them, but none are discarded. Each one is allowed to live on, imperfectly, as if this room accepts time not as precision, but as personality. This is not a workshop, it is a sanctuary. The Victorian period, after all, was deeply invested in timekeeping. The industrial age demanded it. Trains ran on schedules. Factories buzzed by the hour. Letters arrived with increasing reliability. To keep time was to live responsibly, respectably. The clock became a symbol of order and pride. But there is something different about this room, something more contemplative. Here, the clocks are not just kept, they are witnessed. Each one holds a memory, not grand or historical, but personal. The brass carriage clock with the chipped enamel face, a wedding gift, perhaps, the wooden regulator with the worn key, a retirement present from an office. Long since shuttered, the ornate French clock under glass, no longer chiming, a family heirloom inherited with little explanation but too beautiful to forget. They speak to one another in quiet rhythms, a soft conversation carried out in ticks and tocks. No two alike, each insisting gently on its own truth. If you stand still enough, if you truly still yourself, you may begin to feel that rhythm within you, the push and pull of each second overlapping, a heartbeat of the house. Not your pulse, but something slower, older, something that does not care about appointments or alarms, or whether it's 1/4 or nearly noon. There's a window, high and narrow, letting in a muted light. Dust gathers here more slowly than elsewhere in the house, as though time is reluctant to settle too quickly. The air is neither musty nor fresh. It simply is, timeless in the literal sense. A strange paradox, a room full of time that somehow feels suspended outside of it, and then the chimes, not frequent, not synchronized, but when they come, oh, how they fill the space. A distant gong, a soft melody, the familiar trill of a 1/4 hour passing, not loud but layered. You might hear one begin just as another ends. Echoes overlap like gentle waves. On water, no one clocked dominates. Together they create a soundscape that is oddly soothing, as if the house itself were breathing through its mechanisms. People rarely stayed long in this room. It was a place for brief visits to wind a mechanism, adjust a pendulum, or simply pause before returning to the noise of the household. But those moments lingered. A father might bring his child here, showing how a mainspring coils, how a balance wheel dances back and forth. The child listens, watches, then forgets, but the memory of standing among so many clocks stays with them long after. A daughter, grown, might return to the house in later years and find the room unchanged, dustier, perhaps, and a little quieter but intact. She runs her finger along the shelf. The same clocks remain, the same soft ticking, and with it a flood of things she thought she'd forgotten. Because clocks don't just keep time, they keep traces, fingerprints on brass. Scratches from winding, the faint smell of smoke from the fire lit once on a winter afternoon when the power went out. They keep the pause before a proposal, the minute after a telegram, the hours before a funeral. They mark what we don't. Even the broken clocks are allowed to remain here. The one that stopped at 3:17, the one whose hour hand drifts backward, the one whose chime has fallen mute. They are not failures. They are monuments to a moment, a mood, a memory dot to those who kept time, and those who lost track of it. And so the clockroom becomes more than a storage place. It is a meditation, a space where time is not the master, but the guest, where seconds pass not in urgency, but in presence. Each tick a reminder that we are here now, that the house is still living, still listening, still measuring life in small, careful intervals. Let us step out now and leave the clocks to their rhythms. As you close the door behind you, listen. Just for a moment to the final chorus of ticking behind you, a tapestry of time gently stitched, still unraveling. And remember, some houses had rooms for gathering, some for eating, some for sleeping, but a rare few had a room for remembering that time was passing at all. There is one room in the house that almost never expects visitors, a room that exists beyond the reach of polished boots and daily routines. It does not appear on calling cards or in inventory lists. No fire is lit here, no tea is served, and yet it is perhaps the most honest room in the entire home. This is the attic, the quietest place in the Victorian house. Let us begin at the foot of the stairs. Not the sweeping main staircase, but a narrow, twisting set of steps tucked behind a servant's door or hidden behind a heavy tapestry. The air changes as you ascend. It grows cooler, thinner, drier. The smell of dust becomes distinct, not the damp, mouldy scent of neglect, but a dry, papery dust, like forgotten letters, like silence itself. The light up here is borrowed dotted, enters only through small, high windows or gaps beneath the eaves. It glows in shafts, slanting across beams and highlighting the floating path of dust motes. Everything here is slightly golden, but faded as if time itself has taken on a color dot. The attic is not a room. It is a world above the world, a world where things are placed, but never truly put away. Let us walk slowly, stepping carefully across uneven floorboards. You will hear them creak, not sharply, but with a slow, aching protest, like old bones. Shifting, the ceiling presses in low. Slanted beams cast long shadows, and around you rise the shapes of the past, draped in linen, layered in cobwebs, sleeping like statues beneath a spell. There is no clear order here. An old cradle rests beside a broken rocking chair. Hat boxes, bent out of shape, are stacked like weary travellers. A wardrobe stands, its mirror fogged with age, reflecting only blur and outline. Its doors are ajar, within hangs a single coat, fur collar molting, its sleeves still shaped by invisible arms. Trunks dominate the space, battered, leather-strapped, sealed with tarnished brass. They are the treasure chests of the attic, heavy with contents, heavier still with memory. You unlatch one carefully. The hinges groan. Inside, a stack of books wrapped in twine, a collection of postcards, a dried corsage wrapped in wax paper. Another trunk holds children's clothes, tiny boots, stiff with age, a sailor's cap, a toy horse missing one wheel. The garments are stiff, preserved eerie in their stillness, their owners long grown, long gone. But these scraps of cloth remain, not worn, but waiting. Some items seem to hum with mystery, a musical instrument with snapped strings, a photograph album half filled, its pages curling inward like a flower closing at dusk, an envelope unsealed, containing nothing but a lock of hair, a pile of yellowing newspapers reporting on events no one alive remembers firsthand. These things were never meant to be displayed, only kept. The attic becomes a museum of the unsaid, a room of second thoughts and afterthoughts, of objects not important enough to be discarded, but too intimate to be left in plain view. You begin to notice the stillness, not the stillness of sleep, but of waiting, The whole attic seems to be holding its breath. Each item placed here was once chosen, once loved, once needed, and now it is left. Not forgotten, but surrendered. Listen closely, you may hear the house settling, a soft creak in the joists, the wind slipping past the roof tiles, the occasional flutter of a bird brushing against the eaves. But beneath that there is another sound, the hum of memory, the whisper of stories not told aloud in decades. Attics were not just for storage. In Victorian households they served many purposes. Sometimes they were servant quarters, cramped, low-ceilinged rooms with thin mattresses and worn coverlets, a chipped basin, a tin mug, a candlestick. The walls might still bear names etched in pencil, or dates marking paydays, or poems scratched in secret. Sometimes they were workshops, a place for mending shoes or repairing broken toys. A dusty workbench still stands in one corner, tools scattered like seeds after a long-forgotten harvest, and sometimes the attic was simply a place of retreat for a child escaping the rules of the household, for a widower sorting through memories too heavy for downstairs rooms, for a governess between lessons, sipping weak tea from a chipped cup while staring at the sky through a warped window pane. These moments were never written down, but the attic remembers. It remembers the secrets, the hidden diary, the first kiss behind the water tank, the tears shed over a letter that never came. It holds them all gently, without judgment. The attic also held the seasons of a household. Summer parasols wrapped in tissue, boxes of Christmas ornaments, handmade, fragile, wrapped in last year's newspaper, a jar of dried herbs from a garden to summers past, quilts that smelled of camphor, brought down only when frost clung to the windows, and beneath it all, beneath the dust and layers and time, lies something deeper still, a kind of truth. The attic tells us what we value, even after we stop thinking about it, because every object here was chosen to be kept, chosen in a moment of doubt we might need this some day, and sealed away with quiet hope or quiet guilt. And in doing so, each one became something else, not just a thing, a relic, a marker of where we've been, a placeholder for what we didn't want to forget, but couldn't quite carry forward. The attic is where memory settles into object, and where object, over time, becomes symbol. A doll becomes a daughter, a glove becomes a lover, a letter becomes a wound. And yet, there is nothing sad about the attic. Not exactly. There is melancholy, yes, but also a kind of peace, the peace of surrender, the comfort of knowing that some things, though unused, still have meaning, that a life leaves traces, not just in achievements or records, but in the dust that clings to a forgotten chair, in the ribbon tucked into a drawer, in the pair of shoes placed neatly beside a trunk, never worn again. Let us linger just a little longer. The sun has shifted. A beam of light now falls across an old framed photograph propped against the wall. The faces stare back, faded but clear. A man, a woman, two children, formal, unsmiling, but behind their eyes, a life. A house, this attic. Close the trunk gently. Brush the dust from your sleeve. Turn once more before descending. The stairs, you do not leave the attic unchanged. No one ever does. You carry with you the silence, the scent, the weight of all that was kept, and below, the house continues on, unaware. bustling with life and noise and light. But somewhere above it all, in a quiet chamber beneath the roof, the past waits patiently, folded, covered, kept dot, and now. The doors are closing, one by one, each room recedes from view, not vanishing, but dimming gently, like the last light of evening touching the edge of a curtain. The morning room settles back into its quiet glow, the last sip of tea forgotten on the saucer. The scullery, scrubbed clean, exhales a faint breath of steam and soap. The linen cupboard draws its scent-laden silence around itself, folding dreams between cloth and lavender. The music room lets the echoes fade into the corners, where dust waits patiently. The spare bedroom, undisturbed, smooths its pillow once more and returns to its gentle readiness. The clock room ticks, softly still, never quite in unison, never quite stopping. And the attic closes its eyes again, turning over in its sleep, like an old book returned to the shelf. We have walked slowly through their shadows. We have run our hands across old fabrics, lifted dust from forgotten shelves, and listened, really listened, to what these quiet spaces still wish to say, because the house remembers, long after its people are gone, long after the footsteps stop, even long after the voices grow silent. It remembers in the grooves worn into floorboards, in the smudges on brass handles, in the way the light always fell at the same time every afternoon across a certain part of the wallpaper. Victorian homes were not built just with bricks and timber, but with rhythms, daily habits, careful rituals, small acts of patience and pride. And those rhythms remain, not in the grand halls or the drawing rooms, but in these overlooked spaces, in the rooms where no one thought to look, in the rooms where real life quietly happened and then quietly passed. And so we leave them now. We close the attic door. We descend the narrow staircase, hand brushing the banister worn smooth by time. We walk once more through the corridor, each step slower than the last, and we open the front door, just enough to let in a breath of night air. Outside, the world has changed. The sky has darkened. The street is quiet. The lamp flickers, but inside, the house breathes on. It is no longer waiting. It is resting. And so, perhaps, should we, if your eyes are heavy now, let them close. If your breath is slow, let it deepen. You've wandered long enough tonight, through rooms once filled with footsteps, voices, and soft echoes of a past not quite gone, and somewhere, just above your head, a clock ticks gently, still keeping time, still remembering, still waiting, in its own way, for someone to return. Good night.